Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Democracy Now!'s Renee Feltz. Our guests are Lance Lowry in Houston, president of the Texas Correctional Employees, and here in New York, Dr. James Gilligan. For decades was at Harvard Medical School, now at New York University, clinical professor of psychiatry and adjunct law professor, co-author of a report for the New York City Board of Corrections that found the prolonged segregation of the mentally ill in the city's jails violates mental health minimum standards. The tour of Rikers. If you could briefly see what you saw and what you feel needs to be there.
Well, first of all, the buildings themselves are outrageous. Zookeepers are not allowed to keep zoo animals in the kind of housing that we put human beings in jails like Rikers Island. We learned that animals die when they're put in a concrete cage with bars on the wall. So zoos have created, gardens and places for animals to live the way they were evolved to live. We treat human beings worse than we treat animals, and then we act surprised when people behave like animals. But of course we've created the situation. It's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. We say these are animals, they're going to behave like animals. Then we treat them so that they will.
What could be done at Rikers?
First of all, about 40% of the Rikers Island inmates have a diagnosis of mental illness of one sort or another. Close to 80% have a substance use disorder, alcohol being the most serious and severe, because that's the one most associated with violence of all the drugs we have. What I have proposed is that Rikers Island take the mentally ill inmates and create a mental hospital on the grounds of Rikers Island that would be staffed by a professional mental health staff, ideally affiliated with a local medical school, so that it can serve as an extension of the teaching hospitals of the medical school. New York University School of Medicine already provides inpatient care for the Rikers Island inmates when they need that in Bellevue Hospital, in the prison ward. It would be ideal if there were a mental hospital right on the grounds, or in other words, if about half of that jail was simply turned into a big mental hospital. As one psychiatrist pointed out, the biggest mental hospital in the country is the Los Angeles County Jail. The second largest is Rikers Island. If we're going to put the mentally ill there, we should turn it into a mental hospital, because that's what these people need. Instead, we put the mentally ill in solitary confinement. For many, that became the default placement. And you know, the United Nations and the European Court of Human Rights both have declared prolonged solitary confinement to be a form of torture. And it clearly is. It's psychological torture. It drives people crazy and makes them suicidal.
And Lance Lowry, I want to end with you and briefly get your perspective on what needs to be done with the guards who are in these prisons and jails in terms of training and how to deal with the mentally ill prisoners and those in solitary.
We definitely need to up our training these officers on how to deal with the mentally ill. You know, just like he said earlier, the largest mental health facility in the state of Texas is the Harris County Jail right here in Houston. And we need to be able to train these officers to recognize, identify these inmates with mental health conditions. And we also need to increase our treatment programs. These facilities lack a lot of resources, and this has been due to our legislative bodies not funding these entities and moving our closing down our mental health facilities and diverting them over to prisons. And we need to stop diverting mentally ill people into the prison and divert them out.
We want to thank you both for being with us. Lance Lowry, president of the Texas Correctional Employees, speaking to us from Houston, and Dr. James Gilligan, clinical professor of psychiatry and adjunct law professor at New York University. We will link to your report for the New York City Board of Corrections that found prolonged segregation of the mentally ill in the city's jails violates the mental health minimum standards, and we'll also post online Mr. Lowry's report calling for a reduction of solitary confinement in Texas. Again, particularly significant, as he is head of the Texas Guards Union. This is Democracy Now! As we turn to our last segment today. Renee?